Truth and Reconciliation Day. Is it me, or is this day all about hating white people and Canadian history? When this day rolls around, I think of Jagmeet Singh and other politicians wearing orange shirts, collectively shitting on white Canadians and our history. Am I wrong? If today was really about treating Indigenous people better, maybe we talk about the Indian Act, where some Indigenous communities don't even have access to clean drinking water, and they are hopelessly dependent still on the Canadian government. Instead, today we glorify Indigenous victimhood, pump the nation up with grievance porn, and really, what's the goal? Personally, I think it's to guilt trip white Canadians and shame anyone who dares to be proud of Canadian history. Ironically, fresh off the boat, East Indians will jump on this bandwagon to shame Canadians here for being colonizers. Well, quite frankly, if you look around, I think it's us being colonized right now. But anyway, Truth and Reconciliation Day. We know what truth means, but did you know reconciliation means the restoration of friendly relations? How on earth does telling a completely one-sided interpretation of history that demonizes white Canadians as a whole help build friendly relations and not resentment? Because this day, I think, normalizes that resentment and hatred towards white Canadians and everything to do with our European and Christian history. If Canadian institutions really wanted to treat Indigenous people better, or wanted to improve relations among all Canadians with real truth and real reconciliation, why would they be obsessed with silencing all opposition to the oversimplified narrative that Canadian history is purely genocidal? Even Indigenous people who have different interpretations of this history or give sympathy to anything white or Christian get sidelined by journalists or smeared by the hate experts. A recent True North podcast about residential schools was censored from Spotify because it was reported for harmful content. A Canadian Antifa-aligned journalist celebrated this, and an NDP member of Parliament called this censorship good journalism. Teachers in Canada have been fired for simply pointing out simple truths that poke holes in this narrative, like some of these Indigenous kids in Kamloops died of tuberculosis. But nope, no fact-checking allowed, you're cancelled. A Global News article from a year ago suggested that even questioning this narrative is violence, and we've seen the Cancel Canada Day campaigns on July 1st, and the Canadian news media will amplify activists who claim celebrating Canada Day is the same thing as celebrating mass graves. Even the good old RCMP echoes this sentiment that stating true stories that oppose the prevailing genocide narrative can be dangerous. You see, Canada, if you don't agree with this oversimplified version of Canadian history, which implies white people are genocidal maniacs, then you'll get branded a residential school denialist. In fact, last week, a new law, C-413, would make residential school denialism a crime. It's clear that this is another attack on our right to free speech, even our right to think freely about our own history. So, what are we going to do about this? I started an initiative, SaveFreeSpeech.ca, the main goal to stop Bill C-63, an Orwellian bill that would be the end of free speech in Canada. But since doing more research on the language around this bill, there is a very clear pattern emerging here. You know DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? Well, Bill C-63 uses a lot of the same language, and it implies that hate speech and hate crimes only really applies to specific identifiable groups, like ethnic minorities. Now, trying to legislate hatred, a human emotion, is a clear violation of our rights that only a tyrant would suggest. But let's talk about some trends of hatred in Canada. For example, back in the day in Canadian history, the Iroquois people genocided Mohicans and other native groups. Now, is it popular in 2024 to shit on Iroquois people for being genocidal? No. Whereas it's very popular to shit on white people for being genocidal. Another popular trend is burning churches to the ground. Over 100 churches have burnt to the ground over the past couple of years across the country. Another popular trend is tearing down statues of Canadian icons of history, like Sir John A. Macdonald or Sir Egerton Ryerson.
Witnessing the moment the statue of Egerton Ryerson was pulled from its perch.
Antifa terrorists through force and Canadian city workers through the stroke of a pen seem to be in agreement that Sir John A. Macdonald, the white guy who started Canada, he's just a racist. Same with the whole history of this place. And have we really seen many pundits or politicians condemn these actions, disgracing our history and targeting Christian communities? I haven't. So it needs to be asked, is this form of hatred acceptable in Canada? Well, the government-funded Canadian Anti-Hate Network admits that they completely ignore this form of hatred.
We are very proudly anti-fascist, and we focus on the far right. If you speak with anybody who is a researcher of this or an expert in national security threats, they will agree that ideologically motivated violent extremism threats primarily today are coming out of far-right organizing.
And wouldn't you know it, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network are some of the people behind Bill C-63. Canada, this campaign to stop hate is popping up everywhere. Bill C-63 is all about further criminalizing various forms of hate speech. Millions in funding was announced last week for the Canada Community Security Program, which is all about combating hate speech and hate crimes. And last week, the United Nations tabled a global digital compact that seeks to combat misinformation and hate speech online. But folks, and especially white Canadians, or anyone who feels at all patriotic about this place, do you think this legislation is going to be used to protect white people from being hated, to protect Christians from being hated, based on everything I just told you? Well, when it comes to Bill C-63, groups concerned about Islamophobia support this bill, groups concerned about anti-Semitism support this bill, but no one is mentioning the obvious trend of hatred towards icons of Canadian patriotism, conservative-leaning Canadians, and Christians. In fact, unfortunately, the Conservative Party, in the debate pushing back against Bill C-63, they basically agree that hate speech laws are only going to be used to protect ethnic minorities. The Conservative Party.
We already have laws that clearly govern hate speech in this country. The government should focus on enforcing existing laws and protecting ethnic minority groups by empowering the RCMP to work collaboratively and quickly with local police forces and share intelligence to protect vulnerable communities, directing CSIS to implement threat reduction measures and communicate threats to ethnic minority groups.
So this idea that we're going to stop hate, or that Bill C-63 would be used to protect also white people from hate speech, don't count on it. Much more likely, any proud patriotic Canadian, white or otherwise, who dares criticize mass migration, say the wrong thing about an ethnic minority, or challenges the official genocide narrative of history will get you branded as the hateful one. You will be the first to get charged and prosecuted by these new proposed laws. But that's okay. Truth and Reconciliation Day supports this idea that Canadians who think like you, well, you deserve it. You're far right. You're racist, you're a white supremacist, peddling hate and misinformation. You see, all of this language has been built up from years of propaganda. And that's why I started SaveFreeSpeech.ca, to fight back against this onslaught of propaganda and this campaign to silence, censor, and dehumanize Canadians who have the wrong opinion. Because folks, if we don't stop Bill C-63, next it's going to be fines, life imprisonment, or house arrest. I hope the Conservative Party sees the light and starts to push back against this clear, creeping far-left tyranny that's also anti-white. But they're constantly terrified to be called names by the mainstream media, so I don't really see how they can help. We can't afford to wait till next year's election to push back on this issue. We need to be brave and bold now, Pierre Poilievre. But I am happy to see the People's Party of Canada pushing back against this. They've been opposing the cult of multiculturalism and mass migration since 2018. You see, more hate speech laws and censorship will guarantee more conflict and division in Canada for everyone. No one wins here. So in the spirit of actual truth and actual reconciliation, let's start to oppose the corrupt bureaucrats, the fake news, and the DEI-obsessed institutions in this country. So I urge you to go to SaveFreeSpeech.ca to learn all about Bill C-63, follow us on social media, and if you really want to help us make a stand against this far-left tyranny, then support our documentary. You can go to givesango.com/SaveFreeSpeech. We expose the Antifa-aligned journalists and academics infecting our institutions and who are hell-bent on taking away your freedom of speech. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your support.